Dustin Carreon, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. Very happy to be here. Excited.
Dustin, you're a one-man Holdco. Your first acquisition was 2017. Today, you've done 4 total acquisitions. Actually, you just told me before we hit record that you've done a little bolt-on, so maybe 4 should be 5. You already had one business. So COI Holdings is a portfolio of 5-ish businesses doing revenue that'll easily hit $20 million this year, 2024. And you are the sole owner. So 100% of the equity is Dustin's. Let's get into it. Dustin, start us off with some background on you, please.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Will. Yeah, we were talking earlier in the pre-interview. My story is probably a little bit different, not too unique, but a little bit different from other guests. I grew up in humble beginnings, lower middle class in Los Angeles, Southern California area. My father was in the scrap metal business. So I grew up exposed to an industry where there was a lot of junk. So it's funny, I'd wake up or come home from school and there would be like a barber chair or a fireman, axe or an old bathtub from the 1920s. So I think that kind of got me started with this adventure and entrepreneurship, right? Like my parents were going to swap meets and doing those types of things. And that really kind of intrigued me. And as I got older, you and I talked about this, like I was a really troubled teen. I got in a lot of trouble. And I went away to like quote unquote boys camp for a while. So
wait, what does that mean? What lines are we reading between here? Is that like,
we'll call it like Camp Snoopy for boys? Basically it's juvenile hall, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I went away for a while, and it was the best thing that happened to me. I got help, and as a result, my life started at a young age to come together. And I became, pretty much, I think what happens is that those kind of experiences early on, they talk about failing early on, and sometimes it's better. I grew up really fast, right? So by the time I graduated from high school, but I had to do a lot of night school and stuff like that. So my opportunity for college was, I'm not going to say it wasn't there, but I'm going to say that because of the circumstances, I didn't go to college. Mm-hmm. And I really had no clue what I was going to do as far as a career. However, I asked my dad to work with this company. But at that time, it was, my dad was freelancing a lot. So he had like basically this 1-person operation that he was running from our 2-bedroom apartment, right? So he literally had scrap metal in the bedroom and so forth. So I started working with him, and then he brought in my uncle. And from that business is where I really kind of started to fall in love with the hunt of the deal, right? Like finding junk for like 5 cents and selling it for $5, that kind of thing. And I was very arrogant, and I told my dad how to scale his business at the whopping age of 19 or 20, right? I told him what I thought he should do, and he just laughed at me. What happened was that by accident or just by kind of chance, we started coming across a lot of recycle electronic components. So nowadays it's all about e-waste, right? So we started to come across a lot of electronics that had gold and palladium and so forth. And in these e-waste, right, and we would buy these giant lots of material, there would be semiconductors, there were chips, right? So, nowadays everybody talks about chips. It was popular then, but kind of unknown. So that's when I got this, idea of, and it wasn't necessarily something that I came up with, but there was other companies that were doing it, that were separating the scrap business and the chip business. So I told my dad, why don't we, learn the chip business? I'll learn it. And, we were just buying a ton of it, like new stuff. It was just being liquidated like crazy in the 90s. So with a $2,000 loan for my dad, or not a loan, but a $2,000 investment, I put a down payment on I think it was like a 3,000 square foot building. Took my brother with me at a young age, one of the workers, and we started buying and selling new electronic components. So we became a distributor of electronic parts. So we had two companies, the scrap business, the electronic business. And it was at that point that, and I think I explained this to you too, my dad got real sick in 99. And at that point, his scrap business was kind of changing, and it was a different type of business at that time. So I ended up buying his shares out right before he passed away. So I became 100% owner of Freelance Electronics. And then from there, I started trying to grow the business. We grew from like 3 employees to 10 or 15, and it just kind of evolved to something completely different from the scrap metal business.
Let me stop you there, Dustin. A couple follow-ups. So when he passes and you have this chip business and you've become an electronics distributor, so the chips business was not about extracting the value from chips as junk or as scrap or as salvage. Salvage is the word?
Yeah.
So was it that, or was it distribution, or both, or what?
Yeah, good question. It started off as the salvage part of it, right? And then eventually we realized that the money was really in the new parts. So if companies, if you go to, it's no different like if you go to, a retail like Walmart or something, and they're going to be liquidating all their stuff. A lot of their stuff is junk, it's scrap, but some of it is still good, and it's in brand new packaging, and it could be resold. And that's basically what we were doing, is we were going to these companies and saying, hey, do you have any excess inventory, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have any junk? And instead of scrapping it, we would remarket it, and we would put it into stock. Because what happens in electronic components, and that happens more than ever, is that a lot of times, especially with government, right, some of these parts become obsolete, but the designs don't change for decades. So if a company stops manufacturing that part, like a Texas Instrument, then they're gonna probably need it someday. So we would put it in stock and just buy and hold, basically, just wait for us to get that call. And usually the person that we bought it from for 2 cents on the dollar
was the same person who was throwing it away.
Yeah, and then they'll come back and buy it eventually. So
yeah. Okay, so you buy out your father as he falls ill. And at that point, it sounds like his business is still just him, your uncle, and maybe another person. Really, as we might call in our world, kind of a glorified job. And you had said earlier that as an arrogant 19-year-old, you instructed him on how you could scale his business. Well, you find yourself as owner of his business, and it sounds like you do scale it. So did you scale it according to your own prescriptions, or was there some other way? How did you go from 3 to 15 people in over what time frame? So I guess pick back up the story there.
Yeah, absolutely, Will. I think what I was trying to get my dad to scale, and again, I sound it sounds terrible saying that, but it was the scrap metal end of the business. And the scrap metal business is a commodity business. It's a very tough business. You need a big yard, big containers, a lot of trucks, and a lot of volume. And that was a commitment that my dad wasn't willing to take. But chips, semiconductors, are small, right? They're small, and they're more, they take up a quarter, 1/4 of the space, and they're 100,000 times more expensive per piece. Yeah. So that was something that I believe we can scale. My dad totally got it, right? Like, he totally stepped out of the way and just said, okay, just, I don't really know what you're doing, but I like the money, and keep doing that. And I'll tell you a little something too. And this is something that I hope it helps other people. And it was key for me. Like, I came across somebody that was kind of a mentor in that industry. It was this old guy that looked like Santa Claus, right? He literally looked like Santa Claus. And he would like have a truck, and he would go around to all these little scrap yards and just buy stuff, right? We buy something for 50 cents a pound. He would come and give you $5 a piece for these. And I'm like, holy smoke, that's great. And I was wondering what this guy looked like. He was homeless. And then I follow him one day, and he has this giant warehouse in Long Beach, and he's selling military aerospace stuff. And this was the guy that kind of gave me the idea of like, wow, that's what I want to do, because I can do that, right? I think I can do that. So I had to, and I think this is important for any entrepreneur. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but I knew where I was going, and it was trying to get that envisioned. So I envisioned like, okay, here's my dad's scrap company. I'm going to partition one part of this small little building. One side will be for electronics, one side will be for scrap. And then once electronics started outgrowing the scrap, I envisioned this warehouse, so I'm going to have all these shelving and all the parts are going to be organized. And that was my goal. And that was my vision. And I think from there is when the pieces fell into place. And it was timing too, Will. It wasn't anything that I think I sought out to do or I take credit. It was things started going crazy in the electronic component industry in the 90s, mid 90s or so. So we just kind of rode that wave. I started hiring. I still didn't know what I was doing. I just made so many mistakes. I knew at a very young age from being around my parents and watching my dad deal, buy low, sell high, I knew how to allocate capital. I didn't even know what that word meant, but I knew how to do it. It was the business side of it, the people side of it, that I had a lot to learn. So that was kind of the early days of freelance electronics.
And just to be clear, so following this guy, this unassuming Santa Claus looking homeless Santa Claus, to his giant factory, his giant warehouse. Basically, what it was, oh, this could be big. This could be sophisticated. So it gave you a North Star in terms of just ambition and how big this thing, this project, this business could maybe one day become. And did you get to know him, by the way? Did he actually mentor you? Uh-huh.
I did. He was like Babe Ruth to me. Like I maybe dating myself a little bit, but he was literally like a rock star to me. I idolized this guy, and he just kind of had this uncular type of personality. But yeah, he was very kind of odd, very intelligent, back east guy from Brooklyn, New York, or from the Bronx. And he just had this thing. But yeah, he allowed me to go inside of his warehouse. So he started buying from me. And then the day came that he let me buy from him. And I was trying for years to be able to go to his warehouse and just kind of pick a basket around and just grab these things. And he kept saying no, he kept saying no, and he kept saying no. And I go, Bob, you got to let me come in. He says, come in on a Saturday and don't tell anybody, because I never do this, And it was at that point that, yeah, he was my mentor by watching me, by myself watching him, and just pretty much telling me in his own way that, you're on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
Keep doing what you're doing. You'll keep getting what you're getting.
Mm-hmm. What a neat story. Bob, what was his last name?
His last name was Averback. Bob Averback.
Bob Averback. Great. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. So take us as far into your story as you need to kind of the launching point where the idea of acquisition and what you're doing now started to be a glimmer in your eye.
Yeah, well, I think what I'll start off with there is going into into kind of the crux or the foundation of what I was really doing at Freelance Electronics, because I think it all leads up to acquisitions, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, some people go to business schools, nowadays. I mean, all this stuff was happening before buy and build and before all this other stuff was being taught. And I think where I'm very lucky and grateful is that I got to experience some of this stuff in a different way. Early on, as far as the business aspect, as far as allocation of capital. And the way I saw it was that I was going out and I would go to companies that would call, some of them were defense contractors, and they would call me up and they would go, we have 50 pallets of inventory. We want you to take this off your hands, right? Well, the value of this inventory acquisition cost may have been, $5 or $10 million. So what do I pay for it, right? How do I figure that out? So what I had to do is I had to almost do like what Warren Buffett calls, discount cash flow, right? Like I have to go in there and figure out how much money am I going to make out of this over years. I'm not going to sell it for $5 million. So I had this process that I developed as far as buying deals and looking at those deals as little tiny companies. So if I buy this $5 million deal that I'm only going to pay $20,000 for, that $20,000 could turn into $200,000 to $300,000 over a couple of years. So if I get 5 of those going, then I have this kind of this Ferris wheel type of event happening. And what happened was during that time was that I didn't know how to scale that well. Like I came to a point where like, this is great. We're making, our margins are on some of this stuff, gross margins is like 95%, almost nothing. But I don't know how to scale it. And the way I can scale it is going to cause me to put more capital into the business and more expertise, and I'm not really too sure. I figure I had to do something. So one of the things that I learned by reading about Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway is that what Berkshire Hathaway was like a failing textile company. And he talks about taking money from a bad asset that's generating cash flow and putting it into a good asset. So I started doing that concept early on, whether it was buying stocks, whether it was buying property, whether it was investing in something else. So I go to Hawaii one day and literally, Will, I buy a book called Buying a Business for Dummies, or Idiots, Buying a Business for Idiots. And I just read it and I go, I could do this. I kind of understand this concept. And what I learned from that book wasn't so much like, talked about due diligence. It talked about sourcing a business, all the things that we are taught now, but this was, 10, 15 years ago, whatever. But it really talked about, capital allocation or trying to figure out how much you're going to really make, right? How to value a business and how to value a business is going to be based on your risk tolerance, and those types of things really made sense for me because that's all I was doing was trying to reduce risk. So I thought about the Berkshire Hathaway concept in this book and said, I think I'm going to do this. Let me get started.
So just to make sure I have the analogy, when you were in freelance electronics, buying big quantities of junk or inventory that the company didn't want anymore, might have a book value of $5 to $10 million. But you weren't going to buy it for that price. The way that's like a business is that you're basically not going to flip that inventory. You're going to sell it gradually over years. So what you're really buying is a stream of income it's going to take you 5 years maybe to unload all that inventory that your supplier is dumping on you. So it will take you 5 years to unload all of that. And so you're calculating, okay, if I buy this big lump, when one big lump, this inventory, how do I calculate what it's going to generate in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And what's that worth to me? And in some ways, that's not unlike when we think about businesses as assets. We also know that we shouldn't think about them just as that because they are fundamentally groups of people. But when we think about a business as an asset, similar thing. You're paying money upfront. You're buying future cash flows with a big lump sum payment upfront. Maybe it's financed, but fundamentally, the seller gets a big chunk of money. Did I get it?
You absolutely got it. 100%.
Good. Really interesting though, Dustin. That really is a really, it does feel very analogous. So it felt natural for you to think about buying businesses. And so to be clear too, you also thought the thing about Buffett taking money from a bad asset and putting it into a better asset, you were at a point in freelance electronics where to get to the next level was not something really that interested you. So it was, at this point, a cash cow. You needed to figure out a better way to allocate this money than just trying to grow the business, which you weren't interested in. So that's where you say, okay, maybe it's time to look around, and you do, and then you find that buying a business for idiots, which opens your eye. The buy then build of 2007 or whatever. What year is this, by the way?
I think it was 2012, 13, something like that.
Oh, not too long ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And how big is freelance electronics at that point?
I think at that point we were probably, somewhere between 1.5, $2 million. So, not, I mean, to me, it was like, oh, my gosh, we're a huge company, right? Because of where I came from. And I really, took out most of the cash flows and tried to reinvest it. But it was really kind of small. And it's really, that kind of business really fluctuates, Will. Like it's not a normal to have a $3 million year and then to have a $1 million year the following year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're like any kind of project business, you're just as good as your last trade sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, but how much, I guess, give us a sense of the cash flow you kind of feel like you're playing with. What are you about to go into the market to buy a business with? What's your balance sheet look like?
Yeah. So at that time, again, freelance is still a really profitable business. And at that time, look at when I decided for myself that I was going to start buying businesses, right? And I want to back up for a second. Like I may have told you this before, like I actually wanted to like start managing money, right? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to get my CFA's license or what. And I'm like, why don't I just be like Buffett and start a fund and do all these things? And I'm like, oh my God, I can't. There's no way I can look somebody in the eye and say, hey, I lost some of your money. I would feel terrible. So I was still trying to figure out what to do. And I think it was at that point where buying the business thing just made sense. And as far as capital that I was going to use for that, like I had no problem. I knew about SBA loans. I looked at so many ways of financing. I read about, seller financing and all these other things, but I had capital, right? I had enough capital to do a deal probably underneath $1 million or so. I mean, if I wanted to, I could pay cash because it wasn't like I was just, super, super full of money. But like, remember at this point in my life, I'm in my, mid 30s or late 30s or so. So I'm already established, right? I started freelance electronics in my early 20s. So yeah. I was able to invest, I was able to save a lot of money. And I really put that, it compounded, right? Yeah. Everything was compounding. Yeah. So at that time, I don't know if that answers your question. I had some capital to play with, and then I was somewhat bankable because I had some assets and so forth. So, and as far as the SBA loan aspect of it was like, the personal guarantee thing, when I started looking at it, it's like, oh my God, I got to guarantee all this stuff. Well, I've been doing that my whole life. Like, I don't really mind doing that because when you start off kind of young, you get that. Why should I trust you? Why should I invest in you? Can you do this? You don't have any experience. So to me, none of that was scary for me as far as personal guarantee.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the transparency there, Dustin, because as always, we're the audience is going to be hearing your story, wondering, if they can do what you've done.
Okay, so acquisition number one is BNB Socket Products, right?
BNB Socket Products.
Yes. So it's a company that's a family-owned business. Second generation. It's been around. There was two companies. So there's BNB Socket Products and then BNB Specialties, and these two companies kind of broke off, even though they're kind of under the same ownership. And BNB Socket Products, the smaller part of the company, was for sale. And I would say that when I started looking for businesses and decided, okay, I'm gonna be on the hunt, that business I came across within months. Like at first it was like, wow, this is going to be easy. I mean, this business is in my wheelhouse, and it wasn't that it was something that I really kind of understood. It's a company that sells nuts and bolts, and a lot of the hardware, right? It goes into aerospace, defense. And I think I was telling you, like, what really intrigued me about this business was that even though it was a small business, I mean, it was doing at that time, $700,000 to $800,000. So it wasn't something that I felt like was too much of a risk. I felt like I could understand it, but there was these little things in that business that were like moats to me. Things that I kind of felt like I understood and things that I liked. And one of the things that you and I talked about previously was that, a lot of this hardware was spec'd in with the manufacturer. So it was parts that basically you kind of create for your customer and you give it your own part number. So they pretty much are indebted to come back to you because you kind of done the work for them. You may even, the BNB Socket Products went to the manufacturers and said, hey, look, I have this client and I need to get this part made. And there was maybe some specifications for it. Maybe it needed a different type of plating on it or a different type of shave or cut. And one of their biggest customers still today is a company that they're one of the largest makers in the world of prosthetic legs, right? And arms. And those actually use a lot of hardware. So I was like really intrigued with that. I was like, wow, that's awesome. And so anyway, so I looked at the business and there were some things that I liked. It wasn't profitable at that time. But I thought I could make it profitable. And as far as the financing's concerned, we went back and forth, and this is one thing I see a lot, like, a lot of times in this type of business, you have to have a lot of inventory. And they thought their inventory was worth more than the actual business, right? So we went back and forth with the inventory. The inventory is worth 400,000, 500,000, whatever. We went back and forth and actually looked at the inventory. And I was like, you know what? The inventory is actually really undervalued here. Like I look, because a lot of times these companies don't know how to, they probably zero their cost, right? At one point or another, and then it becomes surplus. And then all of a sudden it's trying to figure out what it's worth. So I saw a lot of value in that inventory that I believe we can sell and we could continue to sell. So I worked out a deal where I believe the price, the asking price, or what we agreed on the business, was right about, I'm going to say right about 475,000-ish, right around there. And I think we probably paid another 40 or 50,000 for the inventory. So it was upwards around 520, 535,000 in there for the entire business.
Well, how did you arrive at that number? You've said that the inventory, first of all, you said something counterintuitive, that they were actually undervaluing inventory. Typically what we hear from that sellers are overvaluing their inventory. And you as buyer have to be super careful, go in and audit the inventory to the best of your abilities, because a lot of that is going to be unsaleable and essentially worthless. But in fact, in this case, it was the reverse. They were pushing you for an inventory number. And when you looked at the inventory, you said, sure, because you thought the inventory was worth even more than they were pushing for.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's priced in. You just said you paid 40 or 50 for that, and you thought maybe the inventory is worth 150. But you still, if it's a business that's not profitable, how do you come up with the remaining, whatever that is, 400? And you said you paid 475 for the business. Where was that? What was that valuation based on?
Well, obviously there was SDE in the business, right? So once I figured out that what the true SDE was, so they had a general manager at that time that was making a decent salary. So they let this person go. Somebody else quit, like the day that I bought the business. So basically, you had two employees in this business that were basically running the company, and both employees. It is, I am grateful that this acquisition has been my hardest acquisition. I'm glad that it wasn't easy, because I learned so much from it, right? And I think I kind of knew that going into it. So I got a lot of kind of rebuttal from the employees. It was a very kind of cancerous culture, I guess you could call it, a culture of mistrust, right? Mm-hmm. So when I came in, they saw me as like some type of corporate raider or something, like I was going to go in there and shut the business down or something. So there was a lot of stuff to kind of navigate. So what I did was this deal pretty much fell through because I got a sense. And look, I'm gonna tell you something right now, and I think this is kind of funny. So what happened was that this business, one of their vendors was like a friend of mine. He's almost like a surrogate uncle to me. So his machine shop supplies products to the company that I'm trying to buy. Now, I've never bought a business before. I signed an NDA. So I go over to this gentleman and I talk to one of his employees and I said, "Hey, do you know who BNB Socket Products are?" And he goes, "Yeah, we deal business with them. We compete with them. They're a good company and all that." And that's all. I didn't feel like I needed to say anything like, "Hey, keep this on the low." Well, sure enough, Will, a week later, the word gets around that they're selling the business. It gets back to the owners, the sellers and the employees. And all of a sudden they come back to me and they're just yelling at me. You're screwing this deal. I don't trust you anymore. And look, I'm not that kind of person. I really didn't, I shouldn't have done that. But I was trying to make sure that, hey, is this, just like they're doing diligence on me, I wanted to do diligence on them. So this almost threw the deal out the window. So as a result, what I wanted to make sure was once we kind of reworked out the details, I went in there and I talked to them and I said, "Hey, look, I want to make sure that these two employees who are running the entire company, who knew everything about the company, because I made a decision that I wasn't going to go in there and run the company. If I have to, I will." But so I had this thing that I did that I thought it was kind of made sense at the time, where we put aside out of the sale about $150,000 or something like that in an escrow account. So if one of those employees didn't stay, that money would come back to me because I really didn't trust that one of those employees were going to stay. So, and then if they did, then they get some of the money. The sellers get some of the money back, and then the employees will get part of that money as a bonus for staying on in a year. And what happened was that I signed a contract with each employee. So it's not something I do now, but it's something I did at the time, like an employer-employee agreement. And I said, this is your salary. I really need you to stay. We value you. However, after a year, if things don't work out, we just go upon our way. And it was one of the best things that by accident that I did, because one of the employees was just being very difficult, was pretty much taking control of the whole company, where she didn't want to delegate anything else to anybody. So I was in a real big risk of somebody just completely doing things without my knowledge. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what was good was that you got everybody contractually committed to a year without overcommitting, so that if somebody after a year was not long for the business, you could let them go, which is what happened with this particular woman.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And sorry, and just timing here. This is 2017, but you bought the book of How to Buy a Business in like 2012. So it took you a while to actually go out and find a business to buy. Is there, I know I'm stepping back a little bit, but is there anything to say there? Because it sounded like you read that book and you went after it, but it wasn't until 5 years later that you bought BNB.
Yeah, I actually didn't start looking until 4 or 5 years after I read that book. I went back and revisited that book several times. I think I was still trying to really figure out what I was going to do. Like I said, I kind of pondered with, maybe I'm just going to be a fund manager, or maybe I'm just going to do this. And the more and more I thought about it, the more and more just buying a business just made sense.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Okay, so back to BNB. So it's a $700,000 to $800,000 business, and you like the moat. The nuts and bolts are spec'd into client products, which means your clients are other manufacturers, for example, of prosthetic legs. And so in the specification of the prosthetic leg, it'll be like this particular nut from this particular vendor, goes here. And so that's what it means to be spec'd in. It's almost like, it's not just we need some standard nut that you can get from any vendor. No, it has to come from B&B, right?
Yes.
And this is a dynamic that is common in manufacturing, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's common in the electronic components industry. Certain things. I mean, there's like any other manufacturing industry, whether it's cars or whatever it is. There's standard products, standard part numbers. But in this specific case, because it's in the medical industry, and also there's clients that we sell to in the defense industry, that there's very specific things. And we also have what's called an AS 9100, which is an aerospace compliance quality system that we're certified on every 3 years. And in order to keep that certification, you have to buy from certain types of vendors. You have to have paperwork on everything. You have to get special tasks. So again, it's not the hardest thing to do, but there's a lot of companies that just don't want to deal with that. So this company was very big on, making sure that they had their certifications and making sure that they kept up on those standards.
Okay, Dustin, well, give us a little bit more about the transition, because you've told us that it was, I guess, your hardest acquisition, that the culture was toxic. You've given us example of this problematic employee. What else did you learn that year? Give maybe some more highlights. And I want to just get that from you, because this was your first time doing this, and as hard as it was, it did make you feel like, well, no, but this is the way. As hard as this is the way. Let's do more of this. So tell us how it was hard, how you dealt with it, but then why you liked it so much, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I like the business, and this is, look, I read Investing for Dummies a long time ago. And so, sticking to this topic, one of the things that it said, when you're going to be an investor, you kind of have to decide early on what type of investor you're going to be. Are you going to be a day trader? Are you going to be a long-term investor? Are you going to be, you're going to trade, currencies and so forth? And I think with acquisitions, when I decided to be an acquisition entrepreneur, which wasn't a thing then, like I had to decide, what is my area of competence? What are the things that I'm willing to buy? What I'm not going to willing to buy? And again, this whole boring business thing, like I know that nuts and bolts are not going to change anytime soon. They're pretty much, I'm looking at bolts that have been made the same way for like 100 years, just about. So that fits my personality, right? That fits my personality of kind of like slow incremental change. So I think knowing that I was in the right business and doing the right thing is what made it easier for me to kind of deal with all of the things that I was dealing with at that company. So I think that, some of the challenges was really trying to understand that even though it was only two people, that there was, and eventually I brought in like my own team. I brought in people from my other companies, my other company, Freelance Electronics, to help out in those companies. And I think that what it was not really understanding the culture and not really putting down kind of that foundation up front, meaning, this is the expectations. This is what we expect. And it was a real challenge. And then what happened was that I started bringing in consultants, and I started, delegating a lot of things. And then all of a sudden, we just started hiring a bunch of salespeople, right? Thought like, well, this is a good little business. It has a good little moat. Let's go ahead and just expand this. And so we started hiring salespeople, and we just, and brought in people for that. And it was a little disastrous, right? The salespeople didn't work out. There was just all these issues. First off, I just want to go back and say that I made a decision early on. Like I thought about closing the doors. Now, we made the first year, like 2017, I bought the business. 2018, they went from like a negative profit, and we had like we had like a huge, like $300,000 cash flow that year, right? It was huge. And a lot of that was the windfall from the inventory, right? So what happened was that the inventory just kicked in. So then we had to replenish the inventory for the next year, 2019. And then the business kind of started, dropping a little bit. So I made a decision at that point, like, even though it was making money, I was so frustrated. And I said, and I literally thought about shutting it down, right? I think I told one of the employees that, I kind of had like a moment. And I think for me, I had to make this work, right? Like I felt like it was very important. Not that I won't cut my losses if I have to, but I felt like I had to prove this to myself, that I can do this. And the problem was that I was putting too much expectation on myself instead of just taking a step backwards and saying, look, this is a good little business. It doesn't have to sell a lot to make enough money. And it has this little moat, and all we have to do is serve the customers. Try to increase business with the current customers, get back to them in a good amount of time, and give them the service. So I literally started going out there and just kind of talking to the customers, and started to really figure out what is the business that we're in. What is the type of business this is? What are we good at, and what are we not good at? What are the things we should stay away from, and what are the specific things we should do? And once I figured out the business that we're really in and why customers buy from us, then it just kind of relieved this whole thing. Like, I got to fix this. I got to deal with these people. And after a year, then things just kind of worked out. Like the lady who was second in command, she ended up stepping up. She ended up basically becoming the general manager of the company. The other lady that I brought over from one of my other companies, she had experience. They just started to work together as a unit. And the whole thing was, I want everybody in these small companies, and I got this template. I'm building this template, good and bad, the good things and the bad things, of how I'm going to scale this going forward. What am I going to do in my next business? And the number one thing is that you're going to train the person under you to do your job. I don't want one person doing one thing, because one of these days, if we keep buying businesses, you're going to be able to go into the next company. And I want somebody who's going to be able to do your job and do it even better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Huge learning, and very powerful process to bake into all of your employees. So let me just make sure I got that, Dustin. You came in hot, feeling like you had to do grand things with this, kind of from a place of ego to prove it to yourself that you could work magic. And that wasn't going well. And so then you kind of had to take a step back, be a little bit more circumspect, and really understand the core of what the business did. And once you did that and just kind of relaxed a little bit and just said, rather than being too ambitious here, let's be iterative, do what we do already, but better. And that pivot in attitude made it finally work. It's interesting because it's almost like you came in more entrepreneurial, wanting to do things, build, create, change. And then that was the wrong attitude. The right attitude was more of an investor attitude. Like, let's make improvements at the margins, but mostly let's have this thing keep running as it was.
Yeah, it was at that point, Will, where you're spot on. And that's where I kind of already knew this, but I had to, it comes down to you, right? As the owner, as the entrepreneur, as the buyer. It's not about the companies. It's not about the people. It's understanding, what am I really doing, right? And the number one job, especially of you could call it search or whatever, but especially when you have a holding company, my job is to allocate capital. I am to put money to work in the best places. Now, there's a lot of other things that come under that, right? Leader, visionary, try to empower people, recruiting, all that other stuff. But my main job is to do that. So I have to come in there. It was at that point that I realized is what my real job is that, yes, these are small companies, but in order for me to scale this model, to do what I wanted to do, was to become like this, mini conglomerate of these smaller companies where I have flexibility, where I can buy a company over here and have it over there, is that I also have to have trust in my people. I have to have a process, and it's only through autonomy and kind of cutting out, all those layers but having expectations is how I'm going to be able to scale this thing so I could concentrate what I'm really good at, and that's, and again, I'm so used to for all these years, running my little freelance company and doing everything, right? Like doing all the stuff that I had to completely take a step back and realize that's not my role anymore. And it was really tough because I'm a micromanager by nature, but I had to really let go, but make sure that I don't let go too much. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, sure. And we're going to return to that because you buy businesses that basically run themselves with your oversight. And there's going to be a lot of people eager to hear how you identify that, because a lot of people would love, for a lot of people listening, that's the gold standard, to be able to buy a business that runs itself. And it's actually something that we are really wary of advocating too hard here, because often in most businesses that are acquired by people in this audience, they're going to need the active involvement of the owner. The owner, the searcher is going to come, the searcher buyer is going to come in as owner operator, at least for a while. And so your model is the exception, not the rule. And so it's intriguing. On the other side of that first couple of years at BNB Socket, despite the kind of pain and the learnings, you were convinced that buying more businesses was the career you wanted to pursue.
Absolutely. And I continued to keep my eyes open for other businesses. And it was really, so when I really made that decision, right? I mean, years after I read the book, I found BNB Socket Products really fast, right? I found it really fast. And another thing I want to add, like I saw this company and it was like the way it was listed. It's like, oh my God, I know I can buy this company. I know this is perfect. It's close by. It's in the area. I kind of know the industry a little bit. And the broker never returned my phone call. So I literally kept calling them and just told them, look, you have to sell this to me. I didn't exactly say it like that, but I was just like, so you have to do a lot of convincing, right? And obviously having a background, being an entrepreneur is really important with that. It was really important having that background, because obviously they're going to talk to me a little bit differently than they would to somebody who had never bought a business, but they still want to make sure that it's the right fit. But yeah, going back to your point, like there was a 3 or 4 year period that I just didn't find anything, right? I didn't find any businesses. Like it was just, I kind of hit this dry spell. And I never set out to say, hey, look, I'm going to buy a business every 2 years. I'm going to buy a business every year. I'm going to buy a business every 5 years. It was, I think you really put yourself in a position, you limit yourself, and then you feel like it's not that there's anything wrong with search funds, but like any type of fund, you have a timeline. Yeah. And I decided that I didn't want to do that. That's not the type of person I am. I'm used to waiting, like Warren Buffett says, when there's blood on the street. When there's blood on the street, and I know that sounds really gory when you're taught, but I knew that there was that I'm going to jump at the right opportunities when this comes. So I was just kind of patient, and I just kind of waited for more opportunities to come. One thing I just want to add on, Will, I don't want to go back too much, but the difference between somebody like myself and somebody who's actually working in the business, a search funder or buyer who buys a business and works in it. Yeah. I made, and I keep this till today, right? Like I'm fortunate that I have a team now, but there's a time, and I'm dealing with that right now, where I might have to go in there. I'm not opposed to going in there and running the business if I have to. It comes down to me. It's my personal guarantee. And I made that decision now, and I make it today that, when it comes down to it, I'm responsible, for this company. It may not be my fault, but anything that goes wrong within the companies, I'm responsible. So if I have to be there, I will be there. I'm not above that, and I'm not too good at that. I don't think it's a good worth of my time to be there every single day, but I will do what I have to do to keep this company going and profitable.
So over the course of your 7-year adventure here, how many times would you say you've had to get in as operator, as a stopgap?
I would say B&B was the time that I was actually, I wouldn't say I was running the day-to-day, but I was definitely pulling the strings and I was going in there quite often. Like often for me is like 3 to 4 times a week. just to make sure things were getting done. But there's been times where I've had to physically go into like a location and spend time there and really figure out. I think what's important, Will, what I've done is that, and I encourage everybody to do this, and I hear about this a lot on your podcast, and I encourage my people to do this, is, literally get in the weeds. If you have a machine shop, learn the machines, work the machines for a couple of weeks or a couple of days, understand what they're doing. If you have a company that has a milk run or has a delivery route, go on the delivery routes, meet the customers. It was very important for me, and still is, to really try to understand every aspect of that business. And I think you get a certain buy-in from people when you do that. They kind of respect you a little bit more.
Well, many of my guests have found that doing the actual whatever service is being delivered earns credibility and respect from the team. And that's as owner operators. You, who is almost more kind of a little bit arm's length owner, except when you have to be more in the business, there's probably even more of a gap between, how close they feel you are to the business and not. So having you as owner come and do the service and get your hands dirty is probably says even more to them than my typical guests, because you are fundamentally just owner investor. You're not the operator. Couple follow-ups on about you're thinking about doing a fund. You entertained that, and one reason you said you didn't want to do it is because you couldn't stomach the idea of losing money for your LPs. And another was you didn't want to funds have timelines. They need to deploy capital once they've raised it. And you wanted to not have that restraint. You wanted to be just as patient as you needed to be. Very sound reasons. And then there was an example of this. So I guess you said you waited 3 or 4 years. So it was between BNB and your second acquisition that 4-year dry spell occurred?
Yeah, I can't really tell you why that happened or if there was again, it just kind of happened. It wasn't that I was looking. But my next acquisition, which is kind of ironic, was another nut and bolt company in Seattle. And it's a little bit different. It's more industrial supplies. I don't know if you heard of Fastenal or any of the listeners, but it's kind of like a company that goes in and services manufacturers who are building stuff. And a lot of times they'll have these shelves of parts and industrial supplies and vending machines, and they'll restock them every week. And this was a little business in Seattle, a 3-person team. And I talked to the owner, I think it was in 2018 or 19, and the business was a little overvalued. And even though it was in another state, I figured, look, I think I understand this. I don't know how I'm going to run it in another state, but I want to be able to have flexibility. I want to be able to have that option to look at deals just outside of where I live. And so the valuation was way too high, I thought. So during COVID, I think it was in the middle of 2020 or the end of 2020, the business came back online again. And again, I'm not sourcing these directly. I'm looking on Biz Buy Sell, all these sites that we all kind of laugh at. That's where I'm finding a lot of these deals, right? Because they're just kind of in my wheelhouse. And so this guy got the seller, his name's Russ. He fired that one broker. He got a new broker, and it was for sale. And I went ahead and bought it and paid cash for it. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was something. It's by far one of my less profitable businesses, but as far as the return on capital, as far as how much money I put in the money, it's one of the best businesses ever, because these 3 people run this company like it's theirs. I hardly need to talk to them. They come to me when they need something, and they pretty much just run the business on their own. And it was something that was I think I can do this, because it's pretty much like a hands-off thing. Now, it does need some of our attention. However, it was something that I'm like, wow, this is perfect. So I went ahead and got it, and that was my second acquisition.
And how much revenue does that business do? Quest, fastener, and industrial supply.
Quest is doing over $1 million a year. That was during COVID, and it increased over time. That was during that was. I mean, they took a big hit, but I think at the time they were doing just roughly about $1 million at that time.
Okay. So after these two acquisitions of BNB and Quest, you're basically at about $2 million.
Yes.
And so from then until now, 3 years, you jump another 18 million.
Yes.
So there must be one whale in here that we haven't gotten to. Is that what it is?
There's two.
Okay. So the next, so I was going to spend time on your first two acquisitions, but maybe it's the number 3 and 4 that are the big needle movers. Just before we get to those, and we're not going to have time to do the stories there, but you'll tell us about them. You were really strategic in your BNB Socket acquisition in terms of really liking the moat. I mean, you saw where the value was, but it was a 2-person company. So that's an enormous vulnerability. This business up in Seattle, Quest, is a 3-person company. You don't appear to be scared by key person risk.
I think I was at that time, but I decided to do it anyways, because I think what balances that risk for me is, again, it's not that you insure yourself because you know the business, right? So if I feel like I'm confident in the business, right? Is it a business where the economics are somewhat predictable? Well, nothing's predictable 100%, but if it's something I understand, something that I feel like the long-term economics are good, and I kind of understand the business, then I feel comfortable. I think what's happening at this point, Will, is that I'm developing this culture and this process of my companies. Now I have a holding company. I have 3 companies, and I have this team, these people that I could interchange if I wanted to throughout the companies. Yeah. So what I'm really buying is the goodwill of the business. I looked to try to grow Freelance Electronics by acquiring new customers. It would take me 5 to 10 years and a lot of money to try to get inside of a company and say, hey, I want to become your supplier. That's something these owners, these sellers, these baby boomers, that most of them, they did all the work for me. So that's the hard part. So if I could, I'm not saying that I want this to happen, but if any of those 1 or 2 people, if they were to leave, as long as I have a process and a system, I could plug somebody into those companies. And now that I have people for my other companies, the risk is less for me. So that was the whole thing. The biggest risk is losing customers. And that was the thing, was that I had to really look at, like, what's the vulnerability of any of these customers leaving?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really key point. The fact that you had existing staff in your existing first business, Freelance Electronics, meant, and people that you thought you could plug into BNB or Quest, if you absolutely had to, gave you you thought a bench of people that you could lean on if some key person at one of your acquisitions left. And then as you've done more and more acquisitions, your employee base grows and you feel like you can move that many more people around. You have that much larger of a bench to lean on in case a key person leaves. Let me ask you, at this point in the story, you got Freelance, you got your 2 acquisitions. You have foundation kind of principles now. At what point is it at this point that you're really starting to make your vision of what this is going to be better and better defined? Are you still kind of surfing biz, buy, sell, and when something interesting comes along, picking up the phone, talking to the owner? Is it still a little more ad hoc, or is it starting to become a more truly mature holding company with a strategy?
I would say that at this point is when that starts to really come to fruition. I think it's starting to shape. I do have a vision at this point. I have an idea of what if not so much like how many companies we have or what type of companies they are, right? As long as they fit within the scope of what I know, but it's more of like, okay, this is kind of, the cash flow that I think we want to work towards. So yeah, I do have this template, and I think what happens is that, what the last company that I bought. So I bought Sierra Pacific Supply in 2021, or was it? Yeah, 2021 was Sierra Pacific Supply, and that's the biggest company today. And that company was a company that I knew of. It was something that I kind of heard about it, and the company's an aerospace supplier of rivets and fasteners and all kinds of stuff. It's been around for 75 years, and it has an interesting background and interesting story. And it was just the timing. It was during COVID. It had a really, really bad, because it's all kind of related to aerospace and commercial travel and business travel. And I bought it at really the downtime of that business. And at this time, it's like it's definitely the best investment I ever made. But at that time, it was actually a risk. Like we didn't know whether aerospace was going to come back anytime or soon.
Right. So how'd you get comfortable with that? That was quite a gamble.
Margin of safety. I thought about worst case. I got, that was my first, that business was the first official SBA loan that I got, using 7(a) debt. So I got an SBA loan on that. It had a building that I didn't end up purchasing. So I know a lot of these companies have, the owners own the building and you have an option to buy that. So it was all this stuff. So we kind of went back and forth. But it just worked out. It wasn't hard. The owner was a great guy, still is, a little controlling, but he's one of those guys in his 70s that was doing a lot and didn't really find that out until we went in. But just a good staff, some great accounts, and then right after we took it over, about a year later, just things just started really to come back in full swing. So it's just a great business, and we just got lucky at that time.
Can you give us some bullet points on revenue, SDE, terms of the deal?
Yeah, so it was the deal was with inventory. Again, it was another inventory thing, which was also undervalued. But with inventory and the business, I think we paid close to, well, I also bought some of the receivables. So I think it was pretty close to 1.1 million, including receivables, inventory, and the business itself. It's how much I paid for the business. I used about $150,000, put about, roughly close to 15% down on that. The business at that time was doing, roughly $4 to $5 million in revenue.
In the down year.
In the down year, yeah.
Okay, all right. And it's a distribution business, so it's going to be low margins, 10-ish%?
No, their gross margins were, the gross margins are in that industry, they're going to be anywhere from as low as 30 all the way to 50, 60%. They're all over the map. But hardware and military hardware and aerospace types of products generally have a higher margin.
Okay. But net margin after overhead and everything.
Oh, the actual operating margins. Yeah. They were at that time, or generally, they're going to probably be around 15 to 20% around there.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Not great, but not terrible. And the thing is, this is something that I've always the model that I kind of always wanted with freelance electronics, which we couldn't really do, is having a model where, instead of just having inventory and just waiting for people to come to you and say, hey, I need this part and it's obsolete and I can't find it anywhere else. Can you, how much, and can you send it out today? This company sources, whether it's for airlines or whether it's for manufacturers of aircraft or the defense. It actually has a government sell. So we sell directly to the federal government. We actually, customers or manufacturers come to us and then we source it. So we buy it from one vendor and bring it to our location and then put a percentage on top of that. So it's really having that flexibility of being able to source whatever you want, not having to go to just one source or rely on your stock. So it was something that I've always kind of wanted in a business. So when I saw this opportunity come up, I was just like, wow, this is the perfect opportunity, and I wasn't the only one that bid on it. Later on, I found out there was other searchers that it was their first business, and they came up to me later on and said, hey, you beat me out on that deal, and it was just kind of funny. So it was one of those businesses that it was just a great, or the right fit for us.
Well, and so what has happened subsequently? So I guess you bought it in a valley, and it came surging back. So what does revenue look like today in that business?
Revenue is going to be anywhere between 12 to 13 million this year.
Fantastic. So it's more than well over doubled.
Yes.
Oh, it's almost tripled. It's almost tripled, depending on if you're, in 2 years. You bought that in 2021. So it's 2-3 years.
Yes.
Okay. This is great. And so at this point, you really have a distribution, industrial, manufacturing theme going on here. Are you, as you continue looking at deals, that's your wheelhouse? You don't look at anything else. So you're never tempted by the HVAC business or the B2B services business. You are only looking at things in your wheelhouse at this point in the story?
Right. So I was always, I think for my first businesses, like when I set out to do this, I was like, look, I'm going to stay in my wheelhouse. As time went on, I have looked at other businesses. I made an offer on a company that makes batting cages. This was a couple of years ago. I know that sounds crazy. That's another story in itself. So again, I thought that was something I could kind of understand, but I have an open mind at this point, Will, as long as if it's something I may not know the industry, but it's something that I can learn and something that doesn't require a lot of capital, right? That's the whole thing. Do I have to reinvest every penny that I make back into the business? Is it something that could somewhat run on its own? Is it a company that, if I run into trouble, do I need a specific type of professional skill set that I can't find anywhere else? And those are kind of the things that I stay away from. So, I've made offers on, a company that sold tomato paste, so I looked at a lot of different things. So, but basically these types of businesses that I've been buying, since I understand them pretty well, and a lot of times, as you know, and as you hear, a lot of these sellers will choose me or want to choose a buyer that is in that type of industry, even if the offer may be a little bit lower, the terms are a little bit different. So
even though you're in in manufacturing, either directly or indirectly, you wouldn't say generally that the employees at the businesses that you've acquired have skills that are too specialized. You feel like a lot of your employees are people that if they left, you could replace pretty easily?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for the most part, yes. But obviously, we are in a really challenging environment, and as far as just finding people with a certain skill set, but just retaining people. And I think what has happened is that we do have a lot of a few people in our companies now that will be retiring in the next 3 to 4 years. And when you buy these businesses, like there's nothing written down, there's no process. So you go in there and you start talking to them like, hey, they start coming to me, pretty soon, when I start talking to every employee, and they'll tell me, well, I'm going to be retiring in 2 years. So, and I'm like, well, great. Can you train somebody? Do you have anything written down? And they look at you like you're talking another language, right? So, and then when you have them try to train somebody, so that's the biggest thing, like all that information is in their head. So I think those are the biggest challenges, even for the things that don't seem hard, when somebody's been doing this for 20, 30 years, it makes it really challenging to find somebody. But for the most part, it's not too hard to find some of these people, but we are having challenges with that.
And Dustin, your strategy that you shared with us earlier, where everybody in your companies needs to be training somebody under them to do their job, how's that going? It sounds like you actually experience resistance to that at times.
It's going really great, actually. It was something that took a lot of work. Real quick, I did buy my last acquisition is Gates Washer. It's a manufacturing company. It's in Chicago. It's a manufacturer of washers, and it's been around for almost 100 years. I think the best thing we did is we brought in a manufacturing consultant, and they went in there and just started training everybody. They're still on the payroll, and they go in bi-weekly. So they cross-train people. They do Six Sigma. They do best practices. We just got really, really lucky. I pretty much, we hired somebody like a general manager who's been pretty much running part of the company. And then they also have a shop manager too. So those things were very, very key for that kind of business because it does have a specific type of skill set. So we have our holding company, and I have a CFO in the holding company, and I have two other people that support the CFO. And one thing that we did recently, which is a part of the best practice, is that we came up with processes and procedures on every single function as a template for now and for future companies that we want to acquire. So it's basically telling the companies, hey, you could kind of do what you want. You could kind of be autonomous, but here's how to hire. Here's how to fire. Here's how to train. So we have this process now, and it has cross-training in there, and it has every single thing that we need to do, a disaster plan, a weather plan. Now that we have two companies out of California, they have volatile weather. So this has really been huge, and it's really, really great. And so now I'm starting to get to that point where, I could take on other companies where I probably couldn't take them on before because my people were so overwhelmed.
So you're building infrastructure at the Holdco level. You have staff at the Holdco level. You have playbooks and processes at the Holdco level. So there's a standard process of how to fire and how to hire at all your companies. So for the next companies that you buy, you just give them the manual sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about building the staff at the Holdco level. Were these people that were already with you at Freelance Electronics that you've kind of carved out to be your Holdco staff, or what did it look like to build the staff that what you would say is at the Holdco level and not within any of the Holdco, of the opcos within the Holdco?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it's really, really important. And the three main staff, well, I have four now that work for the Holdco company. Three of them came from Freelance Electronics. So they've been with me for 15 years, and I just want to say, like, what's really important about that is that we've had some struggles in that time when we were just one company, right? So these people have stuck with me and stuck with the company for all these years when things are bad. And now, I hope that everybody's being rewarded for this. So I have this, awesome experience and core of people that kind of been there through the crazy times, and now that we're growing, their experience of that. So yes, they started with me at Freelance Electronics. Two of them that are pretty much my CFO and works with the CFO underneath her. They've been with me for those two people. One of them's been with me for 12 years, and the other one's been with me for almost 8 years. And then recently, one of the gentlemen, he worked with my company. He was the warehouse manager, QC manager, and he left and he worked with the competitor. And I brought him back, and he's pretty much the CFO. So he pretty much oversees on a fractional basis most of our companies. So this was something that was kind of built over time. I was very lucky to have that. I know other people have to go out and source these kind of people, but as we get bigger, I think the challenge is do you want to become too top heavy, right? Do you want to add more people on the holding company? Because this model and I could be wrong with this, but this model may not work for somebody that's going to be selling their business to 2 to 3 years, right? You need people integrated in those companies. So this is, this model of kind of having this autonomy in the companies and having support staff at the holding company. In my opinion, it really makes sense for a buy and hold type of strategy.
And to be clear, that's because as autonomous as your opcos are, as your operating companies are, there is some reliance on the mothership, on the shared services of the Holdco. So in fact, they're not truly autonomous. So to sell one, for example, there would be the entity, that business would have some gaps in it. Like it wouldn't have a financial person, for example, because the Holdco is currently doing that for that business.
Well, yeah, each company has its own accounting department. So they're pretty much handling that, but like we're kind of like almost like the CPA, right? So the way I see it is that, yeah, they're all kind of separate companies. And, we at the Holdco, we actually, not that it really matters because it's the same company, but we charge a management fee to each company. So they can kick up. So we're giving them support. So you're absolutely right, Will. Like there's kind of a gap in there if that happens. So, but every company's different, right? The manufacturing company is completely on its own pretty much. They have everybody there and they have to be because they're a manufacturing company. You need a lot of resources in there to have that company, to be able to function on a daily basis.
Gates Washer, how big a business is it?
Gates Washer is probably going to do $6 to $7 million this year.
So are you done buying $1 million and $800,000 revenue businesses?
No, we just bought one.
The bolt-on.
The bolt-on, yeah. I don't know if you could really call that a business, but yeah, I think Will, I think that obviously we've been buying companies that are doing more in revenue, which are going to cost more. I think again that I don't want to handicap myself and just say I'm only going to buy this type of business. I think a lot of people get in trouble by doing that. I think what it really comes down to for me is, the return on capital, right? It's not so much, I'm going to buy a $10 million business, but it's only going to make $200,000 or $300,000 versus, I'm going to buy a $1 million or $2 million business, but it's making $400,000 or $500,000. So it's really looking at those opportunities and trying to act on them really fast.
Let's talk about your decision to be a buy and hold. So before you started this project, you considered doing a fund, being a professional capital allocator, raising money. You decided against that, started buying businesses. That strategy got clearer and clearer over time. And although you still have flexibility, as you just said, you're not limiting yourself to what you'll consider acquiring. But it does sound like you are quite clear on a long-term buy and hold cash flow strategy. Why? How did you arrive at that? What's the vision there? What's the strategy there?
It was, I think we kind of touched on this earlier. It was something that I believe that kind of fit my personality of being able to not have a timeline on when I wanted, and when to buy or when to sell. It was, I think that in my experience and from what I've viewed from other companies is that you're going to go in there and run the company a lot differently if you're going to sell in 3 and 5 years versus if I'm going to buy and hold. I'm going to make different decisions if I'm going to do something temporarily for a quick gain rather than have a little bit of pain for the long-term gain, right? So I realized that early on that that strategy is just not going to work for me. Now, I'm not saying that I'm never going to sell a business before, but I see it as, I know this is kind of a weird analogy. I don't mean to get like philosophical, but I kind of see like the holding company. I get asked that a lot, like, why the holding company? Tell me about it. I want to do the same thing and all that. There was no really grand plan. It was a way for me to organize in my head the structure of the company. So it was easier for me to go out and execute what the vision was. And that was to continue to buy companies from the cash flows. So the bigger the cash flows, the bigger the better that the companies do, the more cash flows, the more I could compound that money, because I'm not taking a lot out. I'm putting just about all of it into the holding company. And it's almost like this, the brand, the trunk, the tree of the company is the holding company, right? And, the branches are the individual companies in itself. And those branches are getting nutrients, which is cash flow. And as long as those nutrients are coming through the tree's going to continue to grow and get taller and taller. But those branches sometimes are going to stop. They're going to stop feeding on the nutrients, right? The nutrients is going to stop. So it's not that you cut off the branch necessarily. I don't see that, but it's taking those nutrients and putting them towards another branch, or adding more branches, which is more companies. So I felt like doing that style, doing that process was going to be best for what I wanted to do, was to continue to scale, and have these companies and have this cash flow. So I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but it was just something that really kind of made sense to me.
Well, it's interesting, Dustin, because I feel like fundamentally you're kind of prioritizing your own freedom. You want to be able to do things according to your timeline. Basically, you don't want to be rushed to make changes. You don't want to have to sell. You want to buy when you want, and so on. And that's a version of freedom, not having LPs kind of lean on you to and impose, their needs on your decisions. And I feel like usually in life, but certainly in business, if you prioritize freedom, it's at a cost of something. So you're not going to grow as much, or you're not going to have as much success. But it seems to have worked really well for you. Actually, you've made an enormous amount of progress in 7 years, $20 million in revenue, all while prioritizing freedom, as opposed to doing, maybe a more aggressive strategy. It's interesting. I feel like it's not what I would have expected. I would have expected a guy who kind of wants to go slow and wants more freedom in his decision making to therefore probably grow slower. But you've grown really quickly. And I guess one follow-up to that would be, I think a lot of the growth story here is in what happened with Sierra, that your big business tripled in size. So $10 million of your aggregate revenue this year will come from Sierra that you didn't necessarily predict. It's just been a wonderful investment that way. Is that a fair takeaway from your portfolio?
100%. It's all about timing and luck, and it's it really comes down to that. But I think going back to the being limited on, you make decisions, and there's pros and cons to everything, and I think there's a limitation on what I can do. And I don't know what my problem is. I don't know if it's I don't trust people, or I have to have total control, or that my philosophy may be a little bit different than others. But I do know, to get to where I want to get, I am going to have to raise money someday. I am going to have to do something. That is going to be part of the plan. And I'm not opposed to that, to doing that. But I think what I really wanted to do, Will, for myself, and maybe this is a part of having that imposter syndrome. I don't really know, because it's like, I feel like, when you say those things and you say where we're at today, as far as revenue, I look at it and I go, wow. And I know I hope this doesn't sound pretentious, but it's me. It's like, wow, I could do better than that, and it's absolutely stupid. First of all, it's not all on me, but it's this, this drive of wanting to continue to get better, and that's what it is. So my point is that I had to do what I've done so far pretty much on my own. And I'm not talking about, I've had a lot of help, right? But I'm talking about with my own capital. I had to do that on my own. And I get offered, I'm very fortunate, I get offered a lot of deals. Whenever there's raises for these funds, people come to me all the time. And I think having that flexibility to pounce when I want to pounce is the freedom that I really want, and not being limited. So as long as I have this stream of cash flow coming in, and all of that can change, right? So, these businesses and this growth that we experience is not going to happen forever. Anything could happen. And I know what's going to happen. I've been in business too long to see that everything comes to a stop sooner or later. The good thing is that we will still be in a position to buy things if we have to. I don't have to go out there, hopefully, and refinance or raise more money and do these things, because we could actually, I hope in those times that we could continue to start buying more businesses and have those opportunities, to kind of take advantage when there's blood on the street.
And that's because even if there's blood on the street and your own businesses decline and sales are hit hard in an environment like that, you don't carry a lot of debt. Is that kind of part of the your ability to buy even if your own businesses are suffering? I guess let's just step back. Talk to us about kind of the debt to equity ratios that you have at the Holdco.
Yeah. So my target is, for me, and I try to be right around 50%. Under 50, let's just say 60% or so of debt to equity, right? And this is and I look at it as my total kind of nut, in a sense, when I have a portfolio. I'm very, very much, if your job is a capital allocator, if my job is a capital allocator, then I have to know my numbers. And, I'm not a mathematician. I don't come from that. I didn't go to school, but I really studied and made sure that I understand numbers and I understand my business, and so many entrepreneurs, so many people don't. And that's fine. I get it. But I have to do that if I'm going to be doing what I'm doing. So yeah, you have to know what you're comfortable with. And for me, it's like, I'll take on, more debt if I have to, if I understand the risk. And if it's something that I feel like, wow, you know what, this just makes so much sense. Like I really can't really lose in this situation. I mean, I can, but I really understand. So going back to your point, like, yeah, I'll take on reasonable debt, but I try to really keep those numbers under, 50 to 60% debt to equity ratio, and I'm looking at everything, and I have, the goal is to have enough assets that, again, going to the concept, is that I have other assets. So I own two of the buildings that the companies are doing business with, right? So I have those options to be flexible, right? My whole job is buying businesses. I think that's where the highest ROI for me, whether it's stocks, real estate, or buying businesses. And out of those three, it's the buying the businesses that's the highest ROI for me. But if I see an opportunity, I have that flexibility. If my debt may be at a level where I'm uncomfortable, I could always be at a point where I could sell one of those assets to buy a better asset. And that's something that I've learned over time by kind of studying the Warren Buffett principles about, taking a bad asset and putting it into a better asset. So does that make sense on debt?
Yeah. Yeah. And so where are you going, Dustin? What is the long-term plan here? Are you targeting a revenue number, or do you have some other North Star?
Will, it's a good question. I'm a very goal-oriented person, and I think I have exceeded all my expectations so far. By chance, I'm very grateful. I never dreamed in a million years. I was happy when I had no money, struggling, and happy now as I was. And I think that it's I never like to put like it's really hard. I am a numbers person, so it's really hard to say, okay, what is success? Is it 50 businesses? Is it 5 businesses? Is it 10? Is it 50 million? But I do have to have a measure. And I think the way we're going, and I think where I would feel like, wow, we really took this thing to an extraordinary level, would probably taking the holding company to $100 million in revenue. So I think I would have said that would never be attainable years ago, but I think there's a chance that we can get there.
Over how long?
I would say, I have that written down somewhere, but I don't know. But I would probably say realistically, probably in 10 to 15 years. Maybe sooner, maybe longer, maybe not. Regardless, I'm really Grateful to be, even if we did anything, like I was just going to take cash flows out of freelance electronics for the rest of my life and just live off of that and be happy with it, And I think at a certain point is where I figured like, look, my desire to grow and to learn was started to happen later on in life for me. And so in
what do
this,
you mean? What do you mean by that?
That I felt like that when I was able to step back and not run the day-to-day of my companies is when I realized that, look, I want to take this to different heights. I want to, let's see how many businesses we can get. Let's see how high we can scale this. And again, it was just something that started happening. And at this point right now, for me, because I'm able to really concentrate on what I'm doing, and I'm able to have a lot of like space for myself, right? I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. Like, I think I heard somebody on your show say, or maybe it was another show, and I apologize, to say that just because I'm not running the day-to-day businesses doesn't mean that I don't have any stress anymore, right? It's a different type of stress. It's a different type of responsibility. So I'm still responsible for everything. I still think about, okay, well, I have the leaders in my company. I'm going to take care of them. But what's happened now, Will, is that I'm able to step back and I'm able to really just kind of work on myself, whether it's mentally, physically, and just really trying to become the best money allocator, the best entrepreneur I can, and the best leader in my people. And as a result of doing that, Will, because there was a time when I was running freelance electronics, I was having panic attacks. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't remember the last time I had a vacation, and I was a lot smaller company then. So now, bigger company, because I was able to delegate, let go, and put a plan in place, I have more drive and I have more energy than I've ever had in my entire career. So I'm just, more pumped up than I ever was today, and I'm ready to keep going.
I think you said in the pre-call that you feel like a kid again. I loved that.
I do.
Does that sound familiar?
I do. I'm absolutely, as there's things that happen every day, but I am so excited, man. I'm just, it's a dream. I honestly do. And I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I'm just absolutely having fun. I love what I do, and I love finding businesses. And this is the best thing that, for a career that's ever happened to me.
Well, that's so wonderful to hear, Dustin. And you're the dream. You're living your own dream, and you're living the dream of many people listening right now. This just seems like the absolute most fun career. And so, before I close this out, I do need to get to this one important question, which is a little bit back more into the weeds, but it's so central to this game, if you will. You buy businesses that run themselves. Yes, you'll dip in if you have to, if there's a crisis, what have you. But as we touched on much earlier in the conversation, so often in our world of ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition or search, the expectation is that the searcher or the buyer is going to come in and be owner-operator. And you identify businesses that don't need that. And in fact, as I think I also said, I actually generally advocate that people not entertain that fantasy. You should expect when you buy a business that it is going to consume you. It is going to be your full-time job and then some, at least for a while. So how do you do that, Dustin? How do you identify businesses successfully? You do this successfully that really do run themselves. The day-to-day is basically they're running themselves, barring a crisis or where they need something from you. Well, teach us, please.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to give any secret or or tell you anything that's different that you haven't already heard of the audience. But I think I'm going to reframe and kind of backpedal a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think what it is that, look, I think a lot of people would argue, even myself, there's no such thing as a business that really runs itself, right? Okay. So I believe the goal is to reframe it as, let me find the business that requires the least amount of oversight, the least amount of fixing. What is the business that, with the right process and the right people, that if I visit it once a year, nothing would really change except for the fact that it has more money than it did today than it did a year ago. So I think that what I do is that I look at a business and going, wow, this is a business that we can hopefully structure in a way where it can run on its own. Because one thing that all of these companies don't have, as you probably know, as a lot of people agree, is they don't have processes. They don't really have processes. They don't have succession plans. They need a lot of direction and vision. And once you figure out what it is, your job the first day, and I said this again, is to understand. Even you think you may know that during the LOI phase, during the due diligence phase, but it's like, how does this company really make money, and what are their business that we're in? And once you figure that out, then I'm able to come in there and go, okay, I think we could get this business in a sense where it aligns with our holding company, where we don't have to hold its hand and solve every single problem. And that's hard. And the thing is that we're going to have those companies that we buy in the future that is going to be the complete opposite. We're going to go, wow, we really screwed this up. So what you can do in the beginning to try to mitigate that is obviously you have to know what you want, and you have to, it's going in there, and like everybody does, it's like, these are the things that I like, these are the things that I don't like, and right away, if I find out that, an owner's doing 3 or 4 jobs, that's a red flag right there that I'm going to probably have to hire 4 or 5 people, or I'm going to have to be in there, and this may not meet the model. So it's finding those types of businesses, not there where they run on its own, but with the right process, I could get it to the point where it could run 80-90% on its own. And one quick thing is that every company has in this model, and again, this is still beta testing, right? My goal is to still scale this, is to have, this is when you come to us and this is when you don't come to us. And everybody knows, anything under a certain amount, anything under $10,000 you can buy, anything over that, it needs an approval. Those types of things. So there's financial decisions, there are, personnel decisions that they can make on their own. And pretty much as long as they know when to come to us, then they come to us. So they have to know what is their authority, what they can do and what they cannot do.
Great, Dustin. Thank you for that. If people want to reach out, how do you like them to do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You could also find me on, I have a Twitter account. I probably have like 10, 15 followers. I don't have anything, but I never tweet, but I'm on Twitter a lot. But yeah, you could reach out to me to LinkedIn.
Okay. Dustin Carreon, congratulations on what you built. I'm excited by your own excitement on your path. It's going to inspire a lot of people. Eager to track your progress here in the years ahead. Thanks very much for sharing it with us.
Thanks, Will.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.